Okay, so here we are back at the Shrine of Resurrection at the beginning of the Champions Ballad DLC. Now, bit of a disclaimer before we get started here. I suppose more so for both these next parts, this part and the finale, which will be next. There are, full disclosure, there are definitely some parts that I will bring up that are completely subjective, and that's totally fine. In my defense, I will be backing up some of my points with some things that we have seen in the playthrough, and some things from your own experience, perhaps, and nothing that you couldn't pick up on some from more proper reviews of this game. Particularly in this part pertaining to the DLC. And it's rather funny and a bit backwards that we're going to be talking about the DLC in this part, and in the finale, I'll be sort of more so doing Breath of the Wild as a whole. Focusing mainly on not the DLC stuff, but also including the fact that the DLC exists. Both parts. There is the sword challenge, Trial of the Sword, and there is this part right here. I will be showing off these parts for the most part in this part. Wow, that totally made sense. I am so sorry. I'm sorry. So I'm going to be talking about the DLC mostly in this part, and I'll be talking about the whole game in the next part, the finale, after we're done doing what we need to do. But in order to start this DLC, the Champion's Ballad, I was hoping for more. And by more, I don't mean so much in more of the same, which is what we got, but I mean more as in a little bit more additive as to what I feel a proper DLC should actually do. So for the Trial of the Sword, I'll get to later, but right now let's talk about Champion's Ballad. You're pretty much given to start this off. You have this task, and wow, they don't even provide you the weapon stash, which is weird because you cannot leave with this weapon. If you could, I suppose, but it's just so weird. The whole thing is just anyway. Yeah, you can't. They won't even provide you with a weapon slot for it. This weapon is specifically for the use of this DLC to get it going, to be more exact, and it will do this. If some of you recall in the first part, I had mentioned how it doesn't matter what your health is going to be for the DLC. This is why. You're always at a quarter heart, no matter what. As long as you're doing this part of the Champion's Ballad, while you're on the Plateau, you will always be at a quarter heart, and you have to carry this weapon. You don't have to use it. That's actually very important, but you do have to carry it, and of course that means anything that taps you, yeah, you go down. This is an exercise in frustration. I don't think this was necessary, but without having to add anything else in, I'm not going to call them lazy, but I'm definitely going to call them pressed for time, 100%, because as it is, many have concluded that Breath of the Wild was rushed in certain aspects already, and then when you have an order to make DLC for that already rushed product, yeah, you tend to get this stuff, and the next project I'm going to do has some elements of that as well, but actually, if you go anywhere, I'd like to see any title beyond 2010 that specially focuses on DLC, not live service, mind you, but DLC stuff, doesn't seem to have this issue of good developers putting out subpar for what they are capable of in terms of like downloadable content and whatnot. In this particular instance, the Champion's Ballad provides more of the same, literally in every regard. There are no new enemies, which is really unfortunate. There are no new field bosses, which is even more unfortunate. And there's nothing particularly added to the combat or anything else. This is literally just, hey, we have more challenges for you, and by more challenges, we mean more trials and shrines. They give you a total of 20. These do not count as spirit orbs for anyone who hasn't done this part of the DLC. You're given tokens, essentially, that unlock, well, funny enough, more shrines. And ultimately, this just boils down to the following. You get 20 more shrines, quote-unquote. The DLC shrines, like I said, give you tokens. They do not add to the 120, so there's no way to, like, do these in the process of getting, like, your stats up and whatnot, which I think is a bit of a lost opportunity as well. But when we have this weapon out, you can only use it here for this first part to kick it off. You have to do these 4 tasks to unlock these shrines. Pretty much to give you a bunch of designed enemies. It's kind of like they forced you to do the really poor monster camps, except out here. And they made it so that you're really easy to kill. But even though this weapon, it has a neat little niche. It does infinite damage. It will all at the same time, as much as you take one shot, you die. You also one-shot enemies, which is cute and all. But it's way too easy for a bunch of enemies, since there's more of them than there are of you, to just tap you once. And what I want to say off the bat is this totally invalidates pretty much anything you've been doing up to this point. I mean, it doesn't technically invalidate your shield or your other weapons, which you can use and really honestly should use, especially your bomb arrows. But it invalidates your armor as far as its capabilities. It doesn't obviously, offset its passive stuff. You don't need the barbarian armor to give you plus attack, because that's just the buff I had on right now from the last time. So I, again, champion, funny enough, the champion's tunic, because it allows me to see where they are. Now I'm only going to do this a little bit, but like I said, it's really not suggested to get up close to a bunch of enemies, since one tap from anything will knock you out. So what you really want to do is use a good bow, and then use your bomb arrows to clear the enemies for you. This is treated like a shrine, like you're in a shrine, so you can't use the champion's powers. You see they're turned off. Probably is very likely I could just die here simply because, like I said, there's a bunch of just fast striking enemies. It's just artificial difficulty. I don't like this at all. The shrines I'm more better off with. Don't touch the fire either. Anything that could damage you is gonna knock you off, and then you have to start over again. They are a little bit kinder, I suppose, with the checkpoints or the save points. But that's not really helping much. That mitigates very little. I do not believe these choo-choos are a part of this. They just... Normal enemies, of course, will spawn here. There are certain bokoblins that are part of this, and some that aren't. These ones over here are. And yep, it's night, so there's a bunch of these keys out here, and then they just swooped down and got me once. This does not feel good in any way. I don't understand what they're going for. And it's all from time constraints. So what I will probably end up doing now is I'll just continue my dialogue over this as I try to get through these first few parts and keep the, like I said, keep the content more relevant as to pertains to the DLC, and then we'll pick it up from there. Right, so before we get into anything else about the DLC, I need to make a bit of a correction. I actually misspoke when I said that there were 20 new shrines. I actually added the 4 on the Plateau to the total number of shrines that are in the Champion of the Ballad DLC. You get 4 on the Plateau, yes, but after this you're going to be sent off to pretty much each Divine Beast, and it's going to ask you to find 3 additional shrines. Shrines of which can only be found by doing 3 additional challenges. It essentially gives you a bit of a riddle to solve, and you have to go to a certain place or a certain area at a certain time to do a certain thing. A fun little thing about that, which I actually have to say is the one genuinely good thing I liked about the DLC that I wish they built on to a degree. But yes, so I got the math wrong. There's 4 on the Plateau, and then there's 3 for each Divine Beast, making 12 plus 4, which is 16. You do actually get spirit orbs from these 4 additional shrines, so you actually do, that's the second correction I have to make, you actually do get a little bit of a boost of an option to your stats. Now, I did want to show some of the Plateau shrines, because, to be completely fair, these shrines are definitely well thought out, especially in the scope of comparing it to the other 120. To that end as well, you have to think about, they only had to think about 16 additional shrines, but it's good to see that they've definitely got no shortage of, and that they're fully capable of thinking of some really nice, very thought-provoking shrines. Some of the shrines, I'll leave a link in the description for the Joseph review of Breath of the Wild, which I've been hinting to or alluding to before with the title Not Enough Zelda. So overall, we did, like I said before, we did get pretty much more of the same, which is go around to do stuff, or pretty much like some of the cast riddles is to unlock a shrine. The ones on the plateau have to deal with the traditional method of clearing areas. The areas are themed, so for each. The first one is mostly moblins, this one is Lizalfos, there's another one which is moblins, and the last one is stall enemies, the skeletal enemies. Again, just more of the same. If you missed out on, or if you just realized that fighting the monster camps is really rather frivolous and a waste of literal resources, then you'll no doubt pass it, and so obviously they made that a key thing here. I like the fact that they have themes, but again, because the combat is only very basic and straight up, I don't want to say bare bones because that, you know, it's a very bad connotation, but to be frank, to get my point across, it really is. And like I said, you know, you're always, you know, debating on how much of a resource dump you don't want to make it. I have no problems using my bomb arrows because there's plenty of ways to get a hold of them via shops, which you don't have to worry about because naturally the ancient arrows and the bomb arrows cost a lot of rupees. But you use the Dragon Shard exploit and that's not a problem anymore, which is why I believe that it's definitely a requirement to sort of mitigate this sort of thing. I did mention that it was a bit odd that they throttled arrow quantity, since, you know, it's totally possible. It just, if you really want to do something in a game design, my philosophy is don't make it needlessly complicated, especially if there's a way out. It just adds more artificial length and artificial difficulty. These two separate things which are very much present in the DLC. The plateau is, I understood that, okay, the quarter of a heart thing is silly. Find, you know, beat up these guys, get the shrine, and then do the shrines. So just to compartmentalize this a bit better, those are just my overall thoughts. The shrines are fine. They're some of the better shrines in the game because they have very well thought out themes and angles to them. We don't show it here, but there's even a shrine that takes what you're used to doing and puts another spin on it. It looks like it's a battle shrine, but after the battle shrine is done, there's no monk at the end of it. It actually goes down and you have to do some more puzzles and other stuff. So I thought that was really neat. The process to finding these shrines and fighting them, at least the ones on the plateau so far, is needlessly artificially complicated, or artificial difficulty. It's ridiculous. So I have no problems about dumping all my bomb arrows into these enemies, because, well, this would be the time to use them. They put a bunch of ridiculous enemies in front of you with a really silly challenge of you just getting like one-tapped. They pretty much ask for near perfect execution, or otherwise just not being shy with your resources, which I guess you could argue overall is something you need to learn and come to terms with in the game overall, but that'll be a little bit more for later. I particularly like this shrine that we're seeing right here. I thought it was really neat, the idea of taking in light sources, and I really feel like this is something they should have played on a bit more. Like I said with Varudanya, I think it would just, especially with the lighting and the coloring in this game is fantastic. You know, this game does look very well polished and self-contained for its art direction. I just think it looks really great. Finding the other, doing the other stuff for the divine beasts is all well and good, but then it comes to more atypical shrines. The plateau shrines, these four, are much more well thought out. The other ones are, the other 12 then, are more atypical, and that's really unfortunate. But so yeah, I think it was somebody who said, I think it was, no, probably Joseph again, saying that he actually took the shrines apart and actually determined how much of these are actually good, like puzzle segues, and how much of these are just, you know, placeholders or time wasters. But yeah, that's as far as that goes. You have to rematch the Phantom Blights in their Divine Beasts for pretty much a very basic reward that you would imagine. I mean, yes, it is good to get the champion abilities back at double the rate, or in other words, their cooldown is cut down in half, and that's neat, but I don't like how they did that. And they take away all your equipment. You can't use your equipment in the Phantom Ganon rematches. You have to essentially, I know they're trying to do, you know, show don't tell storytelling, because you're essentially given the articles of weaponry that the champions would have had at the time, and so you're pretty much asked to defeat the Phantom Ganons with the same strenuous restrictions they had. And I kind of get it, but it's one of those things where it makes sense in lore, but doesn't make for good gameplay. On the contrast, when you go through all this nonsense, I was actually very relieved to find out that you can rematch the ancient monk Maz Koshia here. He and Calamity Ganon are the only true boss fights in this game, and they're very well done. Each of their they have multiple phases. Each of their phases has multiple ways to interact with them, multiple ways to go about doing it. Urbosa's Fury makes some of it trivial, but more to a degree in that it's easier to do damage to them, and none like the Phantom Ganons, in which they were just pushovers. You find one decent way to do damage to them, and then the fight's over. If you could call it that. If you can even call it a boss fight for that reason. But yeah, Calamity Ganon and Ancient Monk Maz Koshina here are actually beefy enough to where they have proper, a proper boss health pool, and yeah, there's plenty of ways to interact with them. I mean, yeah, you see some repeat here with the Phantom Ganons, but it's just well culminated here. It makes for a much better design. Now, the temple itself for here is, well, it's certainly a lot better definitively than Hyrule Castle, if anything, because you can interact with it again like the other Divine Beasts. But once you're done here with this fight, I'm glad I had the opportunity to re-show this fight a little bit. It's not too complicated. It's a decent fight in that it's a proper boss fight. It's nothing like a raid boss or anything. But yeah, him and Calamity Ganon. Here's my main issue with the Champions Ballad DLC. Now, you do all of that stuff, and I know it was really easy for me to just, sum it up in these few statements, but that's really all there is. If you just looked up a playthrough and you could just follow it through if you haven't done the DLC, I'd be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you would just okay, just skip ahead, because it's more of the exact same. Nothing else is different. And what do you get for it? You get a nice prize with one major issue. You get the Master Cycle Z, this right here. It's a very cool idea. If only most people probably hadn't explored all of Hyrule already. It ends up being more of a brag reward sort of thing, but what burns me is how superfluous it becomes if, at this point, if you're well steeped into the story, you play it how they intended you see the lousy hitboxes it can still have. It's better than the horse's controls, don't get me wrong. But still, yeah, they got plenty to work on for the sequel here. And ultimately, with the Trial of the Sword just being, more of the same, and there's an island on the bottom right of Hyrule that gives you a special challenge where you have to scavenge everything and start from zero. Again, an instance where, the Phantom Light rematches, they take away all your gear, it's just down to your gameplay. Those are, little special puzzle stuff that is fine for separate issues like that, but to base a whole DLC on that is, for me, again, this is subjective, not something I wanted. I wanted something more akin to, or if they could have made a Savage Labyrinth where you do use all your gear, and then make us, test us in an endurance challenge, which is kind of what Savage Labyrinth can be. What's really neat here is that at the very least you can use a lot of this as a proper use of a resource dump and use the fuel for the Master Cycle Z, which I thought was nice. But ultimately, it was so underwhelming. It was such a letdown. And I'm gonna be honest, I kind of regret spending $35. This is terrible, but, I would say this to any developer, not a developer myself, but having been a gamer for a long time, is I wouldn't put out anything that, you could just watch YouTube for, which is pretty much the cutscenes. You want something the players want to experience. But the reason I have the Hyrule Shield out here as we go into the finale is because I decided to show this very important Tarrytown quest. So we'll pick it up from there, guys, the finale, and I'll finish my shots there. Thank you very much. And I'll see you guys then.